Attention humanitarian and development professionals. Are you looking to take your career to the next level? Then you've come to the right place. Humanitarian Global offers self-paced online courses designed specifically for you. With our comprehensive curriculum, you'll build your capacity in the most critical areas of humanitarian and development work. Our course offerings include monitoring, evaluation, accountability and learning, water, sanitation and hygiene, disaster risk reduction and management, food security and nutrition in emergencies, procurement and supply chain management, human nutrition and dietetics, maternal, infant and young child nutrition. With Humanitarian Global, you'll have the opportunity to grow your skills and impact the lives of people in need. Visit our website to learn more about our courses and apply today.
Today's webinar is on Do No Harm framework, and this is the application of conflict sensitivity to aid policies and programs, hosted by Humanitarian Global. And our keynote speaker for the day is Kevin Kadiri, who is an organizational development and meal expert here with Humanitarian Global. So welcome, Kevin Kadiri. Just before we get into the salutations, I'd like to start by stating a few house rules. House rule number 1 is take advantage of the chat section and the Q&A section. While our experts are presenting, feel free to ask the questions, feel free to share comments on the chat section as well as the Q&A section. And our expert for the day, Kevin Kadiri, will take time to answer those questions. Rule number 2 is at the end of Kevin Kadiri's presentation, there will be a Q&A session. And during this session, we will ask a few participants who would like to ask questions live on air to do so. So in order to do that, we'll request that you kindly raise your hand and we will allow you to unmute yourself. House rule number 3 is if you would like for any of our team members to get in touch with you after this webinar in regards to either something you've learned or something that interests you with Humanitarian Global, kindly do share your details on the chat section or on the Q&A section, and our team members will be able to get in touch with you. So those are the main house rules for today's webinar. I'll begin by introducing our Humanitarian Global team. We have a very big team facilitating this webinar, and I'll simply just ask them to say hello to everyone. So I'll begin with Ian. Ian, say hello to the team, and maybe you can tell them your role at Humanitarian Global.
Thank you for the opportunity, Diana. Hello, everyone. My name is Ian. I represent the business development team at Humanitarian Global. Majorly, I handle the aspects of partnerships and business development to ensure that we are able to align ourselves with the needs of people who are engaging our team. I look forward to a resourceful session, and for any questions, any queries, let's take advantage of the Q&A section or the chat section, and we'll be able to engage more on the same. Thank you very much, and we hope to have a good session.
Thank you so much, Ian. We also have Sheila with us. Sheila, you can say hello to the team.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sheila. I'm the academic registrar at Humanitarian Global. I do look forward to greater interactions and engagements with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sheila. And at this point, I'll introduce our expert for the day because of time. Kevin Kadiri, welcome. Welcome to the floor. The floor is yours. I know you have a lot to share with us today on Do No Harm framework, the application of conflict sensitivity to aid policies and programs. So Kevin, I'd like to welcome you to the floor. You can start off by just saying hello to the members and then dive right into the session. And after the session, Kevin Kadiri's session, we'll have a Q&A session as well that will follow promptly after, as well as just a little bit of a discussion on who Humanitarian Global is, as well as our upcoming trainings. So Kevin, karibu sana.
Thank you very much, Diana. I appreciate and thank you for the entire HG team. And thank you all participants for being present for this particular session. So we have time, and there is a lot to discuss within the time that we have available. However, we will try as much as possible to do what we can within the time we have. However, I would just like to mention, even as I start, that, and Diana, you can enable screen sharing. Even as I begin, I would just like to say what we are going to go through today is just a part of the entire framework. So I want to hope that it will excite you to want to learn more, to want to dive deeper, to want to dig further, just to find out how else we can be able to use this framework, and you know, how to look at the different steps and going deeper into it. And of course, if you're interested to dive deeper or go deep into it, you can always reach out to the HG team, and they will be able to guide you on how to go about that. The courses are available and so on. Diana, kindly assist me. Screen. Okay, thank you. Thank you. All right. I want to believe that we can all see my screen. If you can just write something in the chat, say, yes, I can see your screen. If you're ready to go, you can also write, yes, I'm ready to go. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. That is wonderful. So we are going to go through this do no harm framework. And yeah, of course, as you can see from my screen, a lot of this information is gathered from CDA Collaborative Learning Projects, who did a lot of research on how conflict sensitivity is key and important in whether be it peace building, humanitarian, or development projects. And therefore, through the research, through the work that they did, then the framework was born. Of course, just a quote that I like starting with: the learning is not attained by chance. It must be sought for with ardor or passion, and attended to with diligence. So even as we go through this, I hope it will excite us to want to dig more, learn more, find out more, so that we can even be better practitioners in our different fields of work. So today we just want to focus on three things. One, we want that by the end of this session, we should be able to recognize the language of do no harm. And we'll see why it's important to understand and recognize this particular language. And then number two, we just want to understand the basic premise of this tool. Yeah, why do we see this as a good tool, you know, to project or program design, planning, implementation, and even impact assessment with regards to conflict sensitivity. And then we are going to have an overview of the key steps. You know, what are the steps if you intend to use this particular tool to either design your intervention, or to monitor your intervention, or even assess and analyze and evaluate your intervention to find out whether it is conflict sensitive, whether your intervention was reducing the possibility of conflict, or actually it increased the possibility of conflict in the particular community that you're working in or project. So just to start us off, what is do no harm framework? Now, like I've mentioned, this is one of the several tools for the application of conflict sensitivity to aid policies and programs. So most of the time you will hear organizations, people will write in their proposals that our program is conflict sensitive. But if you really wanted to ensure that your program or your intervention or project is conflict sensitive, this is one among many tools that you can actually put into use to help you assess the extent to which your intervention is conflict sensitive, or as you design your intervention to ensure that your intervention is conflict sensitive. And by conflict sensitivity, conflict sensitivity recognizes that aid, be it development or peace building or humanitarian assistance, has the potential to support either conflict or peace. So and I believe all of us, when we reflect to the work that we do, the behaviors of our team members or our staff, how we divide resources among the community, how we conduct ourselves in the community or in the work that we do, whatever it is that we do has the potential to either support conflict or support peace. So conflict sensitivity recognizes this fact when it comes to aid assistance. Now, probably it would be nice to begin by trying to understand and remind ourselves what really is conflict sensitivity. And this is the ability of the organization, one, to understand the context in which it is working and the dynamics of the relationships between and among the groups in that particular context. So if you're working in a particular community, conflict sensitivity is your ability as an organization to be able to understand the dynamics, how the different social groups relating in that particular context. How are the different religious groups operating in that particular context? How is the relationship between the low-income earners and the high-income earners, the informal sector and the formal sector? So all these relationships, all these groups within a particular context that you're working in, conflict sensitivity is your ability to be able to understand how these relationships are working and the dynamics. And then number two is to understand how the details of your intervention interact with that context. So number one, you've understood that in this particular context, we have 3, 4, 5 religions, we have, and this is how they relate with each other. These are the issues that are there. You have understood we have the informal sector, formal sector, we have women groups, we have youth groups, we have groups made up of people living with disabilities, and you want to find out, there is the government, there is the citizens, there is all these groups, working class, the unemployed, and you've understood the dynamics. And then number two, you want to understand how the details, and underline and bold the term details, because as we will see later, it's usually not the entire intervention that is a source of conflict, but the details of the intervention that create conflict or build peace. So to understand how the details of your intervention interact in that context, how is my program interacting with this context where men and women cannot sit together, or the old and the young cannot sit together, or this group and that group do not see eye to eye. So this includes not only the outcomes of the interventions, but the details, how your selection of participants, where you hold your meetings, when you have your meetings, because you might have a meeting, you say, we will be having our trainings every Friday. Then you forget you come from a community where probably for you Friday is a working day, but in this particular context, Friday is actually is a weekend, you see. And that, so, or even how you select participants, are there people who will feel that you have favored a particular segment or a particular group of that population over the others? So the details of your program really matter. The details of your operations. How do you hire? How do you do procurement? I believe you've had stories and situations where communities have complained that why is it that we are having all the procurements or the suppliers in this project coming from a different area, or coming from a particular community, or seemingly are related to so-and-so, the security and so on, the specifics of your policies, the criteria setting for both programs and operations. How is your, gender mainstreaming policies? How is your child, protection policies? What policies do you have? Procurement policies, HR, how do they interact within the context that your intervention is? Then number three, act upon this understanding to minimize the negative impacts which your intervention may have on the context, and maximize on the positive impacts. So these three aspects is what we define as conflict sensitivity, that it is the ability of your organization, one, understand the context in which you're working and the dynamics of the relationships among groups and between groups. Two, understand the details of your intervention and how they interact in that particular context. And then number three, from whatever you found out, then act upon this understanding to minimize the negative impacts. You see how this could be very important, especially in your program design phase, where you already look at your activities, you look at your processes, you look at your hiring procedures, you look at your procurement manual, finance manual, and you ask yourself, how are these things interacting within the context that we are working in? Are we likely to exacerbate conflict, or are we likely to reduce the possibilities of conflict and probably even strengthen and build peace between and among the groups in that particular community? Now, I said one of the things we want to understand is the language of do no harm. So the language, the words themselves, do no harm, actually have been used widely, and also they have been abused in the same sense for those of us who work in the aid and the development sector. So, and you have heard this, many people will talk about applying a principle of do no harm, or they will say our project is using a do no harm lens, you know. And some people and some organizations will distinguish between the capital do no harm, which will most of the time be referring to the framework, and the lowercase do no harm, which is the principle or the lens, you know. So when you look at your organization, then you can see where do you fall. Are you among the ones who say, you know, our intervention, we are using the principle of do no harm, you know, it's the do no harm lens, or you're actually following through the do no harm framework that we are going to see later on as we continue with this particular presentation. Now, an alert, just something that I thought would be important to share and bring out for those of us maybe who might not be aware. That one, conflict sensitivity is not peace building, and peace building programs are not necessarily conflict sensitive because of their conflict focus. Now, conflict sensitivity is a tool for program quality and effectiveness, applicable to all types of programs. Like we said from the definition, you want to understand. Yeah, it's a tool trying to understand the context, trying to understand how different groups operate, how your intervention interacts within that particular context, and designing an intervention that will be able to minimize the negative impacts and maximize the positive impacts, all right? And peace building most of the time is a program goal, you know, that we are doing these activities in the name of peace building, you know. So very robust and thorough application of conflict sensitivity with a focus on building the connections and reducing polarization among groups can actually have outcomes that are related to peace building or building peace. That if we apply conflict sensitivity in the way we should and focus on the dividers and the connectors, as we're going to look at as we continue on, then we probably will have an outcome that is related to peace building, or we will be able to build peace or strengthen peace in that particular community. Now, again, conflict sensitivity is outward looking. It is mainly concerned with what the program is doing and how it is affecting other dynamics in the context. Again, if you go back to the definition, is how is my intervention interacting with issues, conflict issues within this particular community? You know, while when you look at peace building programs, they're mainly designed to address conflict dynamics. So most of these programs will either have activities that are trying to reduce the severity of the conflict. So you'll see peace building programs will have activities like, you know, you want to bring the elders of this community and the elders of that community to discuss about this issue that is probably causing conflict among them. Or you want children from this community over the school holidays to go and interact with children from the other community to be able to address the causes and the factors that probably might drive to conflict. So that would mainly be how a peace building program looks like. So just to mention also that there are no clear lines around these topics. When you talk about conflict sensitivity, peace building programs, security, and so on, there is no clear demarcation. However, they sort of shade into each other. You know, they overlap. And that is why sometimes they create confusion about what exactly do we need to do in this particular context where there is conflict. Do we need to have peace building programs? Do we need to, use a conflict sensitivity tool? That will probably lead to us including activities that one of the outcomes will actually be building peace. And what would be the impact of these interventions if we focus on peace building as a goal? Because like I said, you could have peace building program that is not conflict sensitive. So you go, for example, it's a peace building program and you want to talk to these two communities that have been fighting with each other. And therefore you call the women, the men, and the children from this community together to talk to them why it is important to live peaceably with your neighbors. Now, you probably forget that within this particular group, there could be groups in this community, there could be groups that actually don't see eye to eye. There could be issues between the men and the women, the young and the old, the different segments of that community. So you might actually think you've brought them together to sensitize them on the importance of living peaceably with your neighbors, but actually by bringing them together, you actually even causing conflict amongst themselves. So it's very important just to be able to be clear, that there is this peace building program, but if you're not careful, you might end up even not creating peace or building peace, but rather exacerbating the conflict between or among some of those groups. Yeah. So therefore, based on this understanding of what conflict sensitivity is, the do no harm analytical framework. So here we are not talking about do no harm lens or do no harm principle, but we are thinking of the framework itself, the do no harm analytical framework. And like we said, it provides us a tool that we can be able to map the interactions of our programs, our interventions, our aid and development assistance, and conflict. And therefore, like I said, you can use it to plan, you can use it to monitor, and you can use it to evaluate both humanitarian and development programs. So as you plan, you can use this tool to find out whether your intervention will maximize the positive impacts or will increase, the negative aspects related to conflict. You can use it to monitor, are our activities conflict sensitive? Are we taking into consideration, what the dynamics, the relationship dynamics between and among these groups that we are working with? You could also use it at the end of your intervention, where you want to evaluate, or at the midterm, you want to evaluate to what extent has our intervention been conflict sensitive. So it is also important to remember that this framework is not prescriptive, but it is a descriptive tool. Why? Because it will help you to identify the categories of information that have been found through experience to be important for understanding how assistance affects conflict. So it's just, and we'll see some of the lessons, 6 lessons actually. Then we will be able to organize these categories in a visual layout, which we'll see at the end, that highlight their actual and potential relationship. And then from there, we'll predict the impact of the different decisions that we have, and therefore we'll have the options. So we'll be able to see the visual at the end after we've gone through the lessons and the steps in the next couple of minutes. So here we are. What are the 6 lessons of the Do No Harm program or framework or approach? Like I said, just a little bit of history of the Do No Harm framework. I think it's in the early 1990s. CDA took up studies to try and find out, and this has been going on up to around 2016, trying to find out how are interventions can interventions become a source or a potential cause of conflict within a community? And can interventions also be sources or causes of lessening the impact of conflict within communities? So they went round the globe in the Horn of Africa, in Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, and so on, in different parts, just to be able to study, to observe, to find out. And so from their studies, we are able to draw 6 lessons about the interaction of assistance and conflict, which is now captured in the Do No Harm relationship framework, which we'll see next after we finish the lessons. So this framework is called the relationship framework because it tries to show how the different elements in a context are related and how these elements interact to create either negative or positive impacts within the context of conflict. So lesson number 1 that was found out, that when any intervention enters a context, it becomes part of that context. So when you go to implement in Somalia, in South Sudan, in Sudan now, where conflict is going on, you are implementing in Cameroon, where in these parts where there is a conflict between the English-speaking side and the French-speaking side, or you're implementing in Nigeria, where there is a religion-related conflict, or you are implementing in Burkina Faso, where there is a coup that has happened and there could be issues among some of these particular groups. When you go to implement in such a context, you become, or your intervention becomes, part of the context. So you can't go with the all-know-it-all and remove yourself from that context. And sometimes, and most of the time actually, it is not always obvious to outsiders who feel that they or their activities are not related to the overarching issues in the context. So you go to South Sudan, let me use South Sudan, not South Sudan, you go to Sudan, where there's currently maybe a conflict happening. And you've gone there, you want to do a development project. And you are not bothered, you are not concerned, and you don't even care with what is going on. You think whatever, you are probably, oh, we are just doing an entrepreneurship program. We are not doing a peace building program. We are not concerned with conflict and security. Remember that the moment you get into that context, you become part of that context. You might just going there to do an entrepreneurship project or a health project, but the conflict that is going on in that particular context will have an impact on your intervention. And on the other hand, your intervention can also have either a positive or a negative impact on the conflict that is going on. So becoming part of the context is unavoidable. You can't operate as though you are not part of that particular context. Even if the staff of that project are not from that particular community or that particular country, you cannot avoid being part of the context. So as the intervention enters the context, you begin to have effects even before what you intended. Yeah, you begin hearing people complaining and you're wondering, where is this coming from? But we'll see later where those things actually come from, things that you did not intend. And Do No Harm framework tries to address these unintended effects. Lesson number 2, every context is characterized by 2 sets of factors, what we call dividers and connectors. So in every context that we are working, there are those factors that will create division or tension among people or groups. Those things that push people apart is what we will refer to as dividers. So you might go to a particular community where values are the things that are pushing people apart. Like, for example, some of the discussions that are going on, there are communities or countries where the discussion on LGBTQ is a divider, that there are people who believe this is wrong and there are people who believe we have a choice. So that issue becomes a divider. That factor becomes a divider because it is pushing people apart, and it is likely to cause conflict or tension between these 2 particular groups. And I think we've had instances around the world where people have been attacked because of what they believe in or what they value or not value. Then connectors, on the other hand, are those things that bring people and groups together. So remember that in some contexts, religion can be a divider, for example, in one context, but in another context, religion can actually be a connector. So as an intervention, you need to find out what, and these things are found in every context. There has to be something that is bringing people together. Even in the most volatile area or region or country, there has to be something that is bringing people together. It could be the market. It could be, you know, the football team or the football match, you know. There is always something that will bring people together, and there will be something that is pushing people apart. And then, and like we say, even in the most peaceful context, we will find dividers. Even in the most violent conflicts, we will find connectors. So we need to be on the lookout for this as we plan, monitor, and evaluate our interventions. Now, lesson number 3, any intervention will interact with both dividers and connectors, making them better or worse. Yeah. So remember lesson number 1, we said you will be part of the context the moment you enter into that context. Lesson number 2, in every context, we will have things that are pushing people apart, dividers, and things that are bringing people together, connectors. Lesson number 3, as an intervention, you cannot avoid interacting with both dividers and connectors, and you will either make them better or worse. There is no sitting in the fence or on the fence. So an intervention can have a negative impact. You can increase tension among people or decrease and weaken connectors, you know. So you found a community where we have different religions. We have the traditional religion, we have Islam, we have Christianity, we have Judaism, we have Hinduism, and they're living there okay. But then you go there and you begin intervening or doing your project such that you create, yeah, or you decrease the connector. People are being brought together by religion, but now you start working in a way that you're not directly attacking the religion. You probably don't even know you're attacking religion, but you're actually weakening that particular connector. Or you can have a positive impact by minimizing divisions. For example, like the example I was giving, you're going to do a health project, and when you're doing your participant recruitment for the intervention, you really don't do it, you don't discriminate against anyone or anybody based on anything. And by bringing them together, then some of them may realize, I actually thought you guys are evil, but it's just because I had never sat with someone from that particular community or that particular group. Now I see you are just like me. So you see, you can also minimize divisions and increase the connections among the people. So all organizations intervening in complex contexts hope to have positive impact. I believe all of us here today, we all want to have a positive impact in our communities or in the context that we are working in. So the do no harm framework will actually help us to be aware of the unintended impacts on dividers and connectors, which can undermine the positive goals we set for ourselves. I believe we've heard this phrase that has been used severally, that there can be no development without peace, you know, that there are those who believe, you know, even if you have the best development project, so long as there is no peace or there is conflict in that particular place, you are less likely to be successful, you know. So these dividers and connectors, DNH will help us be aware on what our intervention, the unintended impact our intervention has on these things that push people apart or bring people together, which can either undermine or, you know, help us achieve our goals. That is the third lesson. Lesson number 4, interventions interact with dividers and connectors through organizational actions and the behavior of staff. So again, lesson number one, I wish you were in class so that I could point to one of the students and ask them, or one of the participants and ask you, please tell me what is the first lesson that we learned. So the first lesson we said, context, you are part of the context. Number two, in every context there are dividers, and you are part of the context. And then lesson number two, there will always be dividers and connectors. Lesson number three, you will interact with these dividers and connectors, either making them better or worse. Lesson number four, how then do you make these dividers and connectors better or worse? It is through your organizational actions and the behavior of staff. Now, there are common patterns of impact through which organizations and individuals generate impact on dividers and connectors. Now, remember, we said one of our objectives was to understand the language of do no harm approach. So one of them, like we've said, we've talked about, this is a framework, it is a tool. We've talked about dividers and connectors, and now we are introducing what we are calling resource transfers to refer to organizational actions, and implicit ethical messages, that is referring to staff behavior. You know, like for example, you can be in you are implementing a sexual and reproductive health program, and you are working with most at-risk communities, you are working with commercial sex workers. Then you go for a meeting, and then they start describing or talking about what they do. And from your facial expression, they immediately feel the judgment and see the judgment. From your end, you probably have not even noticed. So that is why we call it implicit ethical messages, things that our behavior as staff communicate to the community that might either bring them together or even push them apart. People see you, that when you go to village A, you are so excited, you spend the whole day, and you know, when you go to village B, it is different. And for you, you've not noticed, but then the community is noticing. And this can have an impact on what is bringing them together or what is pushing them apart. So organizations bring resources of some sort into a context. Whenever you go to intervene, there are resources that you bring. So the questions you ask yourself is, what resources are being brought into the context? How are we bringing these resources? What we do says more about us than what we say. You know, you could say, we are a non-discriminatory and a political organization that promotes. Those are things you write in your strategic plans and proposals and so on. But what we see is what we believe. How we see you behave, how we see you conduct your business, that is how we judge you. Remember, the community have not read your proposal. So they don't even know you wrote to your donor how good you are in gender mainstreaming. Yeah. But what we see, you tell us, we are a gender sensitive organization, and then all your staff in the field are male. And then we wonder, okay, the most basic is at least we should see representation of both sexes or both or all genders and so on. So what messages do we send through our behavior? Really important to think about that. Yeah, so that is lesson number 4. Lesson number 5, the details of an intervention matter and are the source of its impact. So remember, when I began, I said, as an intervention as a whole, is the entire intervention is rarely the source of negative impact on dividers and connectors. Rather, it is the small, seemingly unimportant details, like how you recruit, how you talk to people, how you are distributing resources, how you, when they come to the office, how you welcome them. Those are the small things. You know, your procurement, who do you give business? Who are you working with? You know, who do you invite for meetings? How do you invite them for those particular meetings? You know, those small things are the ones that are likely to have either a negative or a positive impact on the dividers and the connectors. So it's rarely the intervention, because the intervention as a whole is a series of choices. You know, what you choose to do, how, when, where, why. You remember, I call them the 5 wives and 1 husband. What, where, who, when. And then we have the husband, how. Yeah. If an intervention has an unintended negative impact, it does not have to change its goals or even most of its activities. What you need to do is to find out what is the cause of this thing, and work on that specific thing. So you don't need to throw away the entire intervention or demonize the entire group, but just find out, how else can we do this? Lesson number 6 is that there are always options. Yeah, you don't have to do it exactly the same way, such that if you don't do it like that, it won't work. That happens with vaccines. But in most of these other programs, there is always options. Yeah, even in vaccines nowadays, I see they call them baby-friendly vaccines, So it's still a vaccine, but the way it's being administered, there are different ways, probably for you to not imagine how painful it will be when the needle is thrust. Yeah, so you can always do things differently than you're doing them. And you can always learn and improve. Yeah. So if you see that you're having a negative impact, feel free, you can make adjustments. And that is why nowadays in project management, we talk about adaptive management, yeah, or agile project management, such that we don't have to stick to the same way of doing things. And that is why, and I encourage you, come and join our courses so that we can discuss this more. Those of us who've been using the log frame as a tool for our project management, one of the disadvantages is that it makes it look like change happens in a linear model. And sometimes it looks restrictive. You have to do these activities, and the assumption is if you do these activities, you will get these outputs, then these outcomes, then this impact, But agile management, adaptive management is that we realize and appreciate that change does not necessarily happen in a straight line and may not necessarily happen how we thought it will happen, And that is why we have the theory of change. It's a theory of how we see change happening, the impact pathways that we see are possible in this particular intervention. And next week we'll have I think there will be a session, just to talk about this as well, So if you see a negative impact, make adjustments. Feel free, to talk to your funding agency, talk to your management, talk to your colleagues, talk to the community, and consider how can we make adjustment and still achieve the same objective or the intended objective. So these are the basic lessons of the DNH program, the 6 lessons that were learned. And these are the lessons that actually have been used to create the framework. And this framework can help you analyze your own work and understand the relationship between what you're doing and the context in which you're operating. So the framework has, some would say 6, others would say 7 steps, which are related to these lessons. So which I will take us very fast in the next 5 minutes so that we have a little room for questions and to hear a little bit more about what is lined up for us. Please join, yeah. Reach out to the HG team. There's quite, I can attest that there's quite as development and humanitarian and even peace and security workers we can gain from the sessions that are offered and the courses that are offered. So this is the Do No Harm framework, a brief description of the 7 steps. So step 1 is understanding the context of conflict. If you look at this step, 1 is related to lesson 1, where basically you want to understand the context, which I have explained what it means in terms of understanding the context of conflict. Step 2, once you've understood the context of conflict, which we said is how groups, the relationship dynamics between or among groups. Once you've understood that, then step 2, analyze dividers and tensions. So you want to find out what are some of the dividers or the sources of tension between groups that may be rooted in deep-seated historical injustices, for example, or some may be short-lived or manipulated, for example. It could be, it's an election year, and the politicians have started using the tribal card or the ethnic card or the religion card. And so it becomes a divider in that particular moment or context, which might be short-lived. So analyze what are some of these dividers and tensions. What are the things that are causing tension between or among groups in this context? What is pushing them apart? Then step 3, analyze now the connectors and the local capacities for peace. So step 3, you want to analyze how people, although they are divided by conflict, remain connected across groups. That yes, we don't see eye to eye in this matter, but is there anything else that brings us together? And you know, some of these things that can bring us together, it could be markets, common experiences, could be historical events, the day we got independence for those who are under colonial rule, you know, symbols, we have these flags and so on that can bring us together, shared attitudes, we all believe in a certain thing, you know, there could be formal or informal associations. These are some of the things that can actually be connectors in a particular context. So once you've done that, step number 4, analyze the assistance program or your intervention. Okay, so do a thorough review. Yeah, where and why are you offering? Why are you doing this intervention? Where are you doing this intervention? Who are the staff, external and internal? There have places that I have been that the intervention didn't take off because the local community said none of them has been employed in that particular intervention. And they said, no, we can't work with people who are not from here. They don't understand our context. They don't know us. They don't know our culture. So it's really important to understand who are your staff. How are they hired? You know, you might be in a community and people realize it is people from village A that form the majority of the staff, you know, so you need to be able to prove and show that hiring was on merit. Who are the intended recipients of your intervention? By what criteria are they included? What have you provided? Who makes decisions? You know, how do you deliver? How do you distribute? If it's an humanitarian project, how do you distribute? How do you identify the households? What do you give them? What proportions? How have you determined that? So analyze your intervention in detail, because remember we said the devil is in the details. It is those small things that either cause conflicts or bring people together. Yeah, when you hear people say, we really like these organizations, they really think about us, you know, it's probably just the way the staff relate with the community. Then step number 5, analyze your intervention's impact on the dividers and the connectors. Remember, there is this term that we used, resource transfers. Yeah, we were saying, you know, and implicit ethical messages, your actions and the staff behavior. So the actions are the resource transfers, and implicit ethical messages, the behaviors of the staff. So some of the things we would want to ask in this particular step, number 5, is, you know, who gains or who does not gain from our intervention? You know, you want to find out what resources are we bringing into the conflict? What impact are our resources having on this particular conflict situation? We want to ask ourselves, what messages are we giving through the way in which we work? When people look at us, what messages are we passing? You know, using our nonverbal cues and communication. Yeah, what impact are we having through our behaviors in the particular context? Then once you've analyzed your intervention and the impact it has on what brings people together or what pushes people apart in relation to resource transfer and implicit ethical messages, then you move to step number 6, where you consider and generate programming options. So finally, if you have analyzed the context of the conflict, you've analyzed the dividers, you've analyzed the connectors, you've analyzed your intervention or your assistance program, then we must think about how to provide the same program in a way that eliminates its negative conflict worsening impacts. Yeah, so we want to find out how do we provide the same intervention without you know, increasing conflict, yeah, or worsening the situation. Yeah, if we find that we have overlooked some local peace capacities or connectors, then we can redesign our program so that we don't miss the opportunity to support peace. Then lastly, step number 7, once we have selected a better programming option, it is important to recheck the impact of our new approach on the dividers and connectors. So step 5, you've analyzed, you've identified the issue. Step 6, you've corrected and come up with a a suggestion. Step 7, you test that suggestion again using the same process in terms of the dividers and the connectors. So these are the 7 steps, and if you look at them, they are drawn from the 6 lessons that we've actually gone through. Now, I again welcome you to HG. Today, I've just gone and rushed through the 7 steps, but with time, we can spend around 3 days just talking about each of these steps. How do we, analyze the context of conflict using the problem tree? Now we call it, in this sense, a conflict tree analysis. We look at the dividers and the tensions, we look at the stakeholders and so on, the connectors. How do we do this? How do we analyze our intervention and so on? Yeah, so these are the steps. Remember, our objective was 1, the language covered. 2, to understand, the premise of do no harm. I've given you the background and we've looked at the lessons. And then number 3, there was also to understand the steps. And then I also mentioned there is a visual that usually, the same way once you do a log frame, you'll have a visual at the end. You do a theory of change, you have a visual at the end. When you use this approach, you also have this visual at the end. So you can have this nice table that is helping you see. When you look at it, you can actually follow it through. Our time is actually done. You can look through and see that 1, you have analyzed the context. Yeah, and you have the context. You have understood how the different groups, the dynamics between or among the different groups. Then you have your intervention. And your intervention, the middle one, the headquarters, mandate funding, these are things that you cannot change. The policies, the amount of money allocated, there are things that you might not be able to change, and those are the ones that we call the headquarters mandate funding. Then you analyze your intervention: who, what, where, when, why. I mentioned the 5 wives and 1 husband. Then after you do that, remember we said next step, analyze the dividers. When you analyze the dividers, look at the systems and institutions, look at the attitudes and actions, look at the values and interests, experiences, symbols, and occasions. This could be what is either bringing people together or pushing people apart. Analyze the dividers, analyze the connectors. Then look at how your intervention interacts with the dividers and connectors. You can see the blue arrow. And when you look at how they interact, you look at your actions and your behaviors, what we call resource transfer and the implicit ethical messages we pass by how we operate. So how does it interact with the dividers and connectors? Then from there, you come up with options that you can use to redesign your intervention. And then remember, we said in step number 7, you again test the redesigned intervention using the dividers and the connectors. So for today, because of time, I would like to stop at that and hand over the podium back to Diana and see whether we can handle 1 or 2 questions and then wrap it up. Thank you so much for listening. If I was too fast, don't worry, come to HG. We are a bit slow and take a bit more time to go through these things. So thank you and welcome back, Diana.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for that very informative session. And just as Kevin has mentioned, this is a part of our Humanitarian Essentials and Principles training, which is starting from the 29th of May. So I encourage you, if you'd like to learn more about all these, join our Humanitarian Essentials and Principles training. My colleague Ian, as well as myself, have been sharing the links with our participants. And for those of us who are also interested on the same, you can share your contact details with us and we'll be able to add you to our list of those who are interested in this training. So I'll dive right into the questions. Kevin, there's quite a number of questions in the Q&A section. I don't know if we'll be able to answer all of them today, but we can start maybe with the first one, the simplest one and the most direct one, which comes from Ernest. Do no harm is a program or a tool? Is it a program or a tool? And what are the components or elements of do no harm?
Thank you so much, Ernest. So the do no harm, depending on the approach you take, it can be, there was the program, the Do No Harm program. And the program was to find out how interventions interact with conflict, or how interventions would either impact either positively or negatively on conflict within a particular context. Now, from that program is where the tool and the framework was born and was designed. So the components and the elements of the tool are the 7 steps that I've taken us through. And then once you follow them, you are able to come up even with that table that I showed at the end of the presentation. So there are those 7 steps. That is the tool, how you go about the Do No Harm analytical framework. Now, like I said, you can use it during planning. As you plan your intervention, follow the 7 steps to find out how are they interacting. Actually, Diana, just very fast, let me mention this. Now, step number 1 to 3. You can use it to analyze conflict. Yeah, let me just share that last bit for us to bring it home. Step number 1 to 3, you can use it to analyze conflict and understand the context. Step number 1 to 5, you can actually use it to evaluate your project in terms of conflict sensitivity. Then step 1 to 7, you can use it to design your project systematically, taking into account the context of conflict. Then step 1 to 7, again, you can use it to monitor the impact of your project in terms of conflict and security or peace building. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, for that. And our next question is, how do you manage in a context where dividers will not want to see or hear about us as implementers?
All right. Now, this question assumes that the dividers are people, based on how it has been asked, that the dividers will not want to see or hear about you. So remember, this is why it is important when you're doing your intervention to first go and understand the context. Now, when you talk to, for example, and there are things you can see, some of them can come from desktop review. Others, when you just go to the community and sit where people meet and listen to people, listen to what they are saying without telling them you're even coming to implement, you begin seeing how the different groups interact and what are some of the things. So you're not really going to ask them, I think you're a divider, but you are looking at, I see there are different faiths in this community. Could religion be a divider or a connector in this particular community? I see people in this community really love playing a particular game. Could that be a connector or a divider? So you employ some of your research skills and M&D skills to be able to identify the connectors and the dividers. And you can use different methods. When you go to research, you can use observation. If you feel people may not be willing to speak to you, you can use observation as a method to try and identify the dividers and the connectors, and also maybe key in-depth interviews with the resource persons in the community. Thank you. Diana?
Thank you so much. And I believe that answers Abdul's question as well on connectors. Elizabeth does have a question. And just before I ask this question, I will be giving a few participants to ask a chance to ask their question live. So kindly raise your hand if you'd like to ask your question while Kevin addresses Elizabeth's question. So Elizabeth does ask, she would like to understand which ethical principles emphasizes the responsibilities to do good and do no harm.
The ethical principles that emphasize the responsibilities to do good and do no harm. Okay, I see that you joined late and trying to catch up with the sessions. So this is where we talked about your actions and behaviors. Your actions as an organization, which we call resource transfer, and your staff behavior. So you might go to a particular community, and every community has a way that they do things. So you have to understand that particular context. You also have to look at the values of that community vis-a-vis the values of your organization. So it's really, we don't have like a standard and say, this is the value. Actually, the principle here is do no harm. that when you're going to that particular community, you do not want your intervention to be what is the cause or the potential cause of causing conflict, which may escalate to violence. So you want to review your behaviors and ask yourself, what are we doing that might either bring people together or push people apart, that might either cause conflict or be part of the solution for the conflict situation in that particular environment. I hope that answers your question, Elizabeth. Diana?
Thank you so much. I will then hand over to Osman to ask your question. And I'd just like to note that due to time, we might not be able to answer all your questions. They're actually quite a lot, but we will address them on our community forum, Humanitarian Global Community Forum. I have shared a link in the chat. Kindly join our community forum and all the questions shall be addressed there. Osman, ask your question. And Hamsan can prepare to ask your question next.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for the webinar. I really appreciate it. And Human Global, thank you so much. I have a question about, you mentioned something about theory of change and do no harm. So I was wondering, what's the relationship between those two?
Okay, thank you so much, Osman. So the theory of change, it is a tool that you use to show or to demonstrate how you see change will happen. And you can use it to design your intervention and at the same time to monitor and evaluate your intervention. Now, the theory of change will be able to show the impact pathways that we are saying, we believe if we do this, this is likely to happen. And if this happens, then this change is likely to occur. If this change occurs, then we are likely to achieve this particular result. Now, when you bring in the do no harm tool or analytical framework, then you're asking yourself, these things that we plan to do in this theory of change that we have, are they likely to cause conflict or reduce the possibility of conflict if conflict exists? Because sometimes your theory of change may be specific on a health intervention or a livelihood program, but it has not considered the dynamics. Now, if you're developing the theory of change and you also incorporate the use of the do no harm tool or framework, then your theory of change, you can confidently say it is conflict sensitive, because you have used do no harm to assess to what extent this theory of change that we are putting into place has also considered the dynamics in the community, the conflict, the dividers and the connectors. And within that theory of change, you might also have included actually even peace building activities, as we mentioned. You've included and adjusted to ensure that your intervention will not be a potential cause of conflict within that particular community. So that's how they are related, that you can use when you are developing a theory of change and you want to ensure that it is conflict sensitive, then you can use the DNH as a tool to ensure that it's conflict sensitive. Thank you, Osman. I hope you answered.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you so much, Osman. And we could quickly move on to Ivy. Ivy, the floor is yours to ask your question. Ivy, are you with us? Okay, then I'll move down the list to Arega. Arega, you can ask your question.
Okay, thank you. Is it hearing? Hello?
Hello, we can hear you. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you so much for the fantastic presentation. I want to just raise one question. How could we can manage in the situation or scenario that, for example, the recruited staffs are apart from the community or not from among the beneficiaries, and the beneficiaries want to be part of the recruited staff, their children, their member of their households. Well, they want to be part of the serving staffs. So how could we manage conflict of interests?
Yeah, thank you very much, Arega. Now, when you go to step number 4, probably because we said you must analyze your intervention in the context of the dividers and the connectors. So if it's one of the things that you've realized that the way that the community has this feeling, and because of that, it is a potential cause of conflict, then step number 6 says consider and generate, options. So, and remember also when we talked about in step number 5, where you're looking at the actions and behaviors, and we talked about organizational policies. So probably you need to go back to your organizational policy. How is recruitment done in the organization? Is it a transparent process? Who is involved? So most of the time, if the community will have this issue, then you can actually show them and tell them this is the process that we took. This is the criteria that we followed. These are the people who applied. This is the qualifications that we required for this particular role. The problem and the challenge will be if there is someone in that community who actually fits that role and applied and was never selected, then you have to have a very good reason as to why that person was not selected. And that is why we say, even I know the question you've asked probably is in the context of the intervention is happening, but it is also very good now, even before we begin intervention, we try and identify, like now you see, maybe if the organization took time, they would have realized if we don't have a representative of the community in our decision-making mechanism, they will likely feel left out. And therefore, as you begin, you ensure that at certain point, either you have a community board or you have, a representative from the community who is involved in 1 or 2, 3 things, so that the community also appreciates that their voice is heard and there is someone who speaks on their behalf. So if you've already recruited, it can be quite a challenge, but you need to share with the community the process that was you took for you to arrive at the person that has been employed. And if they have their own suggestions, then take those suggestions, tell them you'll consider them, and make sure you give them feedback.
Thank you so much. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much for those questions. And as I had mentioned, there's so many questions. Most of them will be answered in our community forum. So make sure you're part of our community forum. We have shared the link with you in the chat section. Join our community forum and all these other questions will be answered. And if you would like to join our, if you'd like to know more about these humanitarian essentials and principles, we do have a 3-day training workshop coming from the 29th of May to the 31st of May. And as you can see on your screen, this is what the training will look like. We'll cover so much more other than what has been covered today. So this training will enable you participants to not only understand the core humanitarian standards of work within the humanitarian field, as well as their implications for policy and practice in humanitarian organizations, but you'll also be able to understand all the principles, I believe they're 9 in number, of humanitarian standards of working in the humanitarian field. And this training will also allow you to get an opportunity to relate learning to everyday experience. So this is a training that's really good for someone who's either currently in the humanitarian field or looking to join the humanitarian field. Some of the objectives that will be covered, as you can see on the screen, as I've talked about some of them as well, is you'll be able to accurately differentiate between the humanitarian principles and impartiality, independence, neutrality, as well as the do no harm. So all these are covered under humanitarian essentials and principles. You will be able to understand the 9 commitments of the core humanitarian standards, which all international organizations do work under. All non-governmental organizations do follow the CHS, the core humanitarian standards under their work. And even now, governments are gearing to following the core humanitarian standards in their day-to-day work while working with other organizations as well as individuals. So this is a very very good training for those of us who are either in government, who are civil servants, who are currently working in NGOs, who would like to join development and aid fields. So this is a good practice for you. This is good for you to have this certificate because even now, as recruiters are currently recruiting people in the NGO field, these are the kind of skills they are looking for. This is the kind of knowledge that they are looking for. The training costs $250, and at the end of this training, you will receive digital certification, which is hosted by HPAS, and HPAS is globally recognized. So whenever recruiters are recruiting for specific skills, in this case, for humanitarian essentials and principles skills, they are able to go on this platform and have a list of those who have attained these skills. So like I've mentioned, it's really important for those of us either in the humanitarian field or development field or looking to join this field to be able to undertake this course. It's a very short course, 3 days short. You'll be able to get these skills, this training. The deadline registration is soon. The deadline for registration is soon. And if you'd like to learn more about this training, we can always have a one-on-one session where we tell you more about what to expect while undertaking this training. I believe with that, we have come to the end of today's webinar. I do apologize today. We've gone 16 minutes over time, but as you can see, there was quite a lot to be covered. And I would like to thank all of us participants for attending, all of us participants for engaging with us, for all the questions that you've been able to ask us. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the feedback that we have received on the same. I'd like to especially thank our expert for the day, Kevin Kadiri. Thank you for impacting your knowledge on us. And we even look forward to you hosting us now for the Humanitarian Essentials and Principles training, the upcoming training. We really do look forward to that. I'd also like to appreciate the Humanitarian Global team for making this webinar possible, for hosting this webinar. With that, I do wish you a great rest of your day, and until we meet again, goodbye.
86% of organizations value professionals that upskill to advance their careers. It's never too late. Enroll for a self-paced online course to begin upskilling in monitoring, evaluation, accountability and learning, water, sanitation and hygiene, disaster risk reduction and management, food security and nutrition in emergencies, procurement and supply chain management, human nutrition and dietetics, maternal and infant young child nutrition. Apply today to enjoy a 10% discount.